A Navy SEAL's German Shepherd wouldn't stop digging at the snow. Then they found a soldier alive Titan stopped walking at the edge of the tree line and put his nose to the snow. Not sniffing. Digging, both front paws moving in the fast, focused rhythm of an animal that has located something it has no doubt about, throwing white powder behind him in arcs, working at the surface with the complete attention of a dog that has stopped caring about anything in the world except the 6 square feet of snow in front of him. Reed Calhoun had been moving through the Colorado backcountry for 4 hours. It was 11 degrees. The search and rescue team had called it 2 hours ago. The avalanche field on the north face of Granger Ridge was too unstable. The window for survival too far closed. And the National Guard Command had made the decision at the forward staging area with the specific efficiency of people who have calculated the acceptable loss and arrived at their number. They had packed their equipment. They had left. Reed had not left. He stood at the edge of the tree line and watched Titan dig, and felt the cold settle into the place behind his sternum where certainty lives. And the certainty said, "The dog is right." He always was. Before we go any further, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay until the very end. What Titan found under 4 feet of Colorado snow is something that will restore your faith in the men and animals who refuse to give up when everyone else has gone home. Stay with us. Reed Calhoun was 44 years old and had the build of a man who had spent 2 decades doing things that required his body to be exactly what it was. Nothing decorative, nothing wasted. He was 6 feet and 210 pounds of trained endurance, with forearms that carried the specific density of a man who has climbed things and carried things and held on to things in conditions where letting go was not an option. His hair was dark, going silver at the sides, cropped close by habit, and his face had the weathered quality of skin that has spent years in wind and altitude and direct sun in places with no shade. His eyes were pale blue, the particular pale blue of winter sky at elevation, clear and far-seeing and calibrated in the specific way of someone who has spent years reading terrain for the things terrain hides. He had been Senior Chief Petty Officer Reed Calhoun, SEAL Team 5, for 17 years. 4 deployments to Afghanistan, 1 to Iraq, and 2 that appeared in his service record as geographic designations that required a clearance he technically still held to discuss. He had come back from the last deployment with a Navy Cross, a separated right shoulder that had healed at 85% of its original range of motion, and the particular knowledge of a man who has done the thing long enough to understand that the doing of it was the point, not the having done it. He had retired in September. He had moved to a 40-acre parcel outside the town of Granger, Colorado, because it had elk and altitude, and the specific quality of silence that he had been looking for since he stopped being able to find it inside himself. He had been working with the Granger County Search and Rescue as a volunteer since October, 3 months. 6 callouts, each one handled with the kind of quiet competence that had led the team coordinator, a woman named Bev, to tell him after the second call-out that he was the best tracker she'd ever put on a mountain and she intended to keep him. He had not argued. The work fit the shape of his hands. Titan had been his since 2019, when a combination of Reed's Navy connections and the specific stubbornness of a man who does not accept bureaucratic no as a final answer had resulted in the adoption of a 7-year-old German Shepherd who had served 3 deployments in Afghanistan as a human remains and live find detection dog, and who had no living handler and no pending placement, and who had been sitting in a boarding facility outside Fort Carson for 4 months waiting for someone to come. Reed had driven to Fort Carson on a Tuesday and come home with Titan and a folder of service records that he had read sitting at his kitchen table that night, with the particular respect of one veteran reading the record of another. Titan was now 7, 8 in March, with a coat the color of dark amber over black, thick enough that the snow clung to it without reaching the skin. A titanium implant in his left rear leg from a shrapnel wound outside Jalalabad, and a notch in his right ear from the same incident. He weighed 83 pounds. He moved with the deliberate, conserved precision of an animal in peak working condition that has learned to spend its energy on the things that require it, and nowhere else. His eyes were the deep amber of autumn light, warm in color, cold in attention, always moving, always reading, operating on a frequency that human instruments could not replicate, and that Reed had spent 5 years learning to trust completely. He had been trained for live fine detection, the specific certified capability to locate living human beings buried under snow, rubble, or earth. He had done it in Kandahar twice. He had done it in the Panjshir Valley once. He had done it in the Granger backcountry twice since October, both times pulling snowshoers out of situations that would have become permanent within another hour. He had never dug without a reason. He was digging now with everything he had. The avalanche had come down the north face of Granger Ridge at 6:47 that morning, triggered by the movement of a National Guard winter training unit, 12 soldiers from the 2nd Battalion, 157th Infantry, Colorado Army National Guard, conducting a backcountry navigation exercise that should not have been conducted on the north face of Granger Ridge in February without an avalanche assessment, which there had not been one of. Because the officer in charge of the exercise, Captain Brian Lowell, had conducted his pre-mission planning the night before in the forward staging area outside Granger and had reviewed the general terrain map and the general weather forecast, and had not called the Colorado Avalanche Information Center for the specific slope assessment that the exercise protocol required him to call for. 11 soldiers had been above the fracture line when it released. 11 had self-extracted or been pulled out by their unit within 90 minutes. The 12th, Private First Class Daniel Okafor, 22 years old, first deployment from his Denver unit, married 4 months and his wife 7 months pregnant, had been on the low end of the unit formation when the slide released, and had been taken by the full weight of it into the runout zone at the base of the ridge, where the snow had settled to a depth of between 3 and 6 feet over an area roughly the size of a football field. The search had run for 2 hours and 40 minutes. The Granger County Search and Rescue Team had worked the primary probability areas with probes and 1 search dog, a 3-year-old Labrador named Scout who was certified for avalanche work and who had not alerted on anything in the runout zone. Captain Lowell had conferred with his battalion operations officer by radio and had made the call at the 2-hour mark with the particular confidence of a man who has arrived at a decision and needs it to be final. The conditions were deteriorating. The survival probability for a subject buried at this depth for this duration was below the threshold that justified continued risk to rescuers. And the mission was transitioning to recovery. The team had packed out. Reed had watched them go. He had not gone. He had told Bev at the trailhead that he was going to make one more pass with Titan before dark, and Bev had looked at him with the expression of a woman who has been doing this work long enough to know when to argue and when not to, and she had said, "1 hour, then you come down regardless." He had been on the mountain for 2 more hours. He was watching Titan dig. "Find," Reed said, and it was not a command so much as a confirmation, telling Titan that what he already knew, he had permission to pursue completely. Titan's pause accelerated. Reed dropped to his knees beside the dog and began moving snow with his gloved hands, not probing, moving, clearing, working beside Titan in the specific coordinated way of a handler who has learned that the dog has found the location, and what the dog needs now is the human's hands doing the work the dog cannot do as efficiently. The snow was heavy and compacted near the surface, looser below, the layered density of an avalanche deposit, and Reed read it by touch as he worked, feeling for the change in resistance that would tell him how deep they needed to go. Titan's paws found something. The sound changed, not snow against snow, but snow against something that was not snow, something that gave slightly under pressure and then held. "Stop," Reed said. Titan stopped. He sat immediately, panting, his breath a cloud in the 11-degree air, and he looked at Reed with the amber patience of an animal that has done its work and is ready for the human to do his. Reed cleared with his hands. Carefully now, the thing below the surface was fabric, the thick quilted fabric of cold-weather military gear. He cleared a wider area, a shoulder, an arm. He cleared toward where the head would be, working fast and precise, and when he reached the face, he stopped. Daniel Okafor's eyes were closed. His skin had the gray-blue undertone of severe hypothermia. His lips were the specific color that lips turn when the body has been concentrating its resources for a long time and the periphery has been given up. Reed checked for a pulse with 2 fingers at the neck. It was there. Faint and slow, the deep, minimal beating of a body that has retreated to its core and is holding on with the specific stubbornness of the young and otherwise healthy. It was there. Reed had his radio in his hand before the thought was fully formed. Bev, his voice was level, the voice of a man delivering information rather than emotion. "I've got a live find on the north face, approximately 200 meters east of the primary search grid. I need a litter team and a medic now. Subject is responsive. Pulse present. Hypothermic. 240 minutes under. Static." Then Bev's voice, with the specific quality of a person hearing something they were not expecting and rearranging their entire situation around it in real time. "Say again." "Read live find," he said. "Move." He stayed with Daniel while he waited, doing the things that could be done, clearing the airway, protecting the head and neck, packing insulation from his pack around the exposed areas, monitoring the pulse with 2 fingers in the specific way of someone who has monitored pulses in conditions where the nearest surgical facility was an hour away by helicopter. And what his hands could tell him was all the information available. He talked. Not because Daniel could necessarily hear him, though he might have. The brain at the edge of hypothermia retains more than the body lets on. But because talking was the thing that communicated. "You have been found. You are not alone. There is someone here who is not leaving." Titan lay against Daniel's side. He had done this without being asked. Positioned himself against the length of the young soldier's body with the deliberate, full-contact warmth of an 83-pound dog choosing to be a heat source. His thick coat pressed against the cold weather gear, his head resting on Daniel's shoulder. His eyes were open and watching the surrounding terrain with the patient, systematic sweep of an animal maintaining perimeter while his handler did the close work. Later, in the hospital, Daniel Okafor would tell his wife that he had been aware, in the deep reduced consciousness of the hypothermia, of warmth arriving from one side before any human hands reached him. He would tell her that it had felt like being found even before he understood he had been found. He would not have the specific language for what Titan had done, which was all right. The dog did not require language. The litter team reached them 48 minutes after Reed's radio call. The flight paramedic who accompanied them assessed Daniel in the hole before they moved him, called the hospital in Granger, and gave Reed a look over Daniel's unconscious form that said what she didn't say out loud, which was, 4 more minutes and this would have been a different conversation. They carried Daniel Okafor down Granger Ridge on a litter at dusk, the sky going the specific deep violet of high-altitude winter evenings, and Titan walked beside the litter the entire way down, close and steady, his titanium leg moving through the snow with the slight deliberateness of an animal that carries its history without complaint. The question of why the search had been called was not a question that went away. Bev asked it. The county sheriff asked it. The after-action review that the Colorado Army National Guard's Inspector General initiated 3 weeks after Daniel Okafor was discharged from the hospital asked it with considerably more institutional force. And the answer that emerged from that review was the answer that Reed had suspected from the moment he stood at the edge of the tree line and watched the team pack out. Captain Brian Lowell had not ordered the avalanche assessment that protocol required, and calling off the search before the 2-hour mark, before a dog specifically certified for live find had completed a full pattern sweep of the runout zone. Had been, in the Inspector General's specific and careful language, a command decision made without adequate information and influenced by the need to limit exposure to the consequences of the pre-mission planning failure. That was the institutional language. What it meant was that Brian Lowell had known the assessment was missing and had called off the search, partly because a successful recovery would have generated the documentation that made the missing assessment visible. Lowell was relieved of command pending the review's completion. The review's findings were forwarded to the Judge Advocate General's office. Reed was not informed of the specific outcome because he was not part of the command structure and the JAG proceedings were not public. But Bev told him, in the spring, that she'd heard from her contact at the Guard that a field-grade officer had accepted a reduction in rank as part of an administrative resolution, which was the institutional way of saying he was not going to do this again, and there was a permanent record of why. Reed filed that in the category of acceptable and moved on. He had not climbed the mountain to fix the institution. He had climbed the mountain because Titan wouldn't stop digging. Daniel Okafor's daughter was born on March 3rd. He named her Titan. This is not a thing Reed invented when he told the story later. Daniel called him from the hospital at 2 a.m. His wife had given birth at midnight, healthy, 7 pounds 4 ounces, and said, "We named her Titan. My wife says she wants the dog to know." Reed looked at the dog asleep on the floor beside his bed, one ear tilted up at the sound of his name in the phone speaker, amber eye half open. "I'll tell him," Reed said. He did tell him. He crouched beside the dog in the dark of the bedroom at 2 a.m. and he said, "Someone named their daughter after you." Titan looked at him with the amber patience of an animal receiving information it considers its due, and then put his head back down on his paws and went to sleep. Because it was 2 a.m, and that was the correct response. Daniel drove to Granger with his wife and the baby in April, when the snow had begun to release its hold on the lower elevations, and the cottonwoods along the creek were putting out their first tentative leaves. He shook Reed's hand for a long time. His wife, whose name was Grace, hugged Reed with the specific, full-bodied gratitude of a woman who has been as close as a person gets to the worst possible version of her life, and has been pulled back from it by something she can never adequately repay. She did not try to put it into words. She simply held on for a long moment, and then stepped back with the brightness in her eyes that people have when they are not going to cry, but are acknowledging that they could. Then she crouched in front of Titan. The dog looked at her. Then he looked at the bundle and the carrier on her chest, the specific, careful attention of an animal reading something small and new with complete gentleness. His nose worked at the air near the baby with the slow, deliberate delicacy of an animal choosing precision over speed. Then he sat, and his tail moved, not the quick, perfunctory wag of a dog receiving a social cue, but the slow, certain, full movement of an animal communicating something it has no other language for: peace. Here, this is right. This is exactly right. Grace laughed. It was the specific laugh of someone who has been holding their breath for months, and has finally, in this moment, let it go. By June, Reed had started running avalanche dog certification clinics out of his property for the county's search and rescue volunteers, a thing Bev had asked about in March, and that he had agreed to because the work needed doing, and he was the person to do it, and those two facts together have always been sufficient reason. Titan was the demonstration dog, which he performed with the full authority of an animal who has done the real version and finds the demonstration work appropriately beneath his dignity, but does it anyway, which is a quality Reed respected. On a Saturday in early June, Daniel Okafor drove up from Denver and spent the day at the clinic. He was in good health. The hypothermia had left no permanent damage, which the doctors attributed to the specific physiological resilience of a 22-year-old in excellent physical condition and to the timely intervention in the field, and to the heat source that had been pressed against his body in the snow while he waited. He told the clinic volunteers about being buried, about the cold, about the warmth that had arrived before the hands. He told it without drama, the way people tell stories that are simply true and do not need embellishment. At the end of the day, sitting on the tailgate of Reed's truck while Titan worked a training scenario in the meadow below, Daniel said, "I didn't believe in things like this before." Reed was watching Titan work. "Like what?" he said. "Like being somewhere because you're supposed to be somewhere," Daniel said. "You bought that property in September. You joined search and rescue in October. The avalanche was in February. You were exactly where you needed to be." Reed didn't answer for a moment. He watched Titan complete the pattern sweep, nose working the snow in the meadow, moving with the deliberate, certain rhythm of an animal, doing the thing it was built to do in the place it was built to do it. "He was," Reed said. "I just drove the truck." Titan found the training target, a scent tin buried in the June snow that remained in the high meadow, and sat. Precise. Final. Looking back at Reed with the amber eyes that missed nothing and needed nothing explained. His tail moved once. Sometimes miracles don't announce themselves. Sometimes they walk up to the edge of a tree line on 11-degree morning and start to dig, and the miracle is not the digging, but the man who stayed when everyone else had gone home. And the years of trust between a handler and his dog that made staying feel like the only reasonable option. God places the right people on the right mountains at the right hour, not by accident and not by coincidence, but by the specific providence of a God who does not forget his own. Not the soldier buried in the dark, not the wife waiting by the phone, not the daughter not yet born who would carry a dog's name through her whole life as a reminder that she was wanted and fought for before she took her first breath. Reed Calhoun did not climb that mountain to be a hero. He climbed it because Titan would not stop, and because somewhere inside him, built by 17 years of refusing to leave people behind, there was no other way to be. Loyalty does not calculate the odds. It does not consult the clock or the survival probability threshold or the command decision made at the staging area by a man with different priorities. Loyalty goes back up the mountain, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, in the grace of moments like this one, the mountain gives something back. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that one person who refuses to quit can change everything. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and if you have ever turned back when others kept going, or stayed when others left. We want to hear that. Your story might be the courage someone else needs tomorrow. If you believe in loyalty, service, and the grace that finds people on cold mountains, subscribe to this channel and don't miss the next story. May God bless you, protect your family, and remind you that the people who matter most to you are worth every mountain it takes to bring them home.